For 5 centuries, if you want to know where the future of humanity is headed, you just need to look to Europe. From London, Paris to Berlin, the world received engines, electricity, capitalism, democracy, and even the wars that shaped the globe. But today, something unprecedented is happening. For the first time in 500 years, the future is no longer being written here, not because Europe was destroyed, not because they are poor, not because they lack intelligence, but because the world seems to be learning how to operate without them at the center. While the US accelerates, Asia rises, and new power centers emerge, the continent that once dominated the world is now calmly sleeping in its own museum. In Rome, Madrid, or even in leading economies like Germany, fiscal pressure, an aging population, and energy dependence are creating an uncontrollable spiral. Is this just a temporary recession? Or is it the end of an era that has lasted for more than half a millennium? Because if Europe cannot regenerate its momentum, not only will its superpower status disappear, but the entire global power structure will also be rewritten. And this time, they may no longer have the power to be the ones holding the pen. For the past 500 years, Europe has not only participated in history, they are the ones who directly wrote its script. From the steam engine, the internal combustion engine, the printing press, modern democracy, and even the concept of the nation-state, everything we call the modern world was conceived here. But it seems that as soon as the 21st century began, that great author put down their pen and refused to continue writing the future. Are they tired? Or do they believe that the book ended in a chapter that was too perfect? Europe has built a social welfare model that makes the whole world take their hats off. A leisurely life, free healthcare, and endless long vacations. But there is a harsh truth. The more perfect something is, the easier it is to decay. We are witnessing one of the strangest geopolitical events as a continent with 450 million people and a 0 trillion economy voluntarily resigns from the future. This is perhaps the Venetianization of an entire continent. In 2008, the EU economy was still sharing the table with the US, even slightly surpassing it with 16.2 trillion USD. But by 2023, the US has soared to nearly 27 trillion, while Europe is still struggling at 18 trillion. In just 20 years, Europe's share of global GDP has been halved, from 30% to 15%. In simple terms, this is like two neighbors having the same salary in 2008. 15 years later, one person has managed to buy a few more houses and upgrade their entire life, while the other is still using an old car and struggling with ever-increasing utility bills. Not to mention, while the US, despite its many flaws, continues to produce trillion-dollar corporations like Google, Amazon, Tesla, and Nvidia, Europe has not created a single new tech company worth over $100 billion in the past 50 years. Not a single company. Perhaps they are still busy standardizing the design of phone charging cables while the outside world is redefining artificial intelligence and conquering space. The millennials here are tasting a bitter flavor. They are the first in a century to have a less prosperous outlook than their parents. Although Europe did not collapse due to bombs or war, but their decline in comfort is sometimes even more terrifying. A superpower decided to live on the glory of its ancestors, only to realize it no longer even controlled its own chip supply chain. How long can a civilization survive if they only know how to follow orders designed by others? Do you feel this complacency starting to appear even within your own community? If you value direct perspectives on the rise and fall of empires, please subscribe. We will dissect together what mainstream media often overlooks. Because to understand why the historical pen of Europe has broken, we cannot look at the entire continent immediately. We must look at where the heart attack is happening most intensely. If Europe is a drifting ship, then Germany is the only engine keeping it from being submerged by the waves. But take a closer look at that engine. It's not just overheating, it's disintegrating from within. Germany was once the anchor of discipline, where the phrase "made in Germany" was equivalent to a solemn guarantee of absolute quality. But today, we must name a harsher truth: the industrial bloodletting. Their biggest mistake? That was a naive geopolitical gamble. They bet their entire massive production on a single resource, cheap gas from Russia. When that flow was cut off, the illusion of Germany's productivity also vanished. Currently, industrial electricity prices in Germany have skyrocketed to 3 to 5 times higher than in the United States. Let's do a simple calculation like a business person. Why stay in Bavaria with exorbitant costs when Texas is beckoning with energy prices only a third of that? As a result, for the first time since 1991, Germany recorded a monthly trade deficit in 2022. Giants like BASF and Volkswagen are quietly packing their bags, relocating their factories to the US and China. This is not an expansion. This is an exodus. The irony lies in the fact that Germany once led in industrial robots, but now China installs more robots each year than the rest of the world combined. Even the iconic Volkswagen has been surpassed by Tesla right in its own backyard. Why? Because the Germans are too busy caressing the perfect diesel engines of the past to realize that the world has moved into the era of software and battery packs. In America, you can break ground on a factory in a few months. In Germany, it can take you several years just to get a bunch of red tape permits. The Mittelstand businesses, the backbone of the economy, are now like heavyweight fighters being tied down by regulations, while their competitors are sprinting ahead. Moreover, this machine is lacking operators. An aging population makes high-skilled labor a luxury. When the greatest pride of a nation, its creative and productive capacity, is stripped away by energy policies and bureaucratic structures, what will remain? Perhaps the Germans are striving so hard to protect the climate that they are ready to turn their entire industrial sector into a green historical monument. What do you think? Can a country prosper again just by setting standards for products it can no longer produce? Leave your comments below. Don't forget to subscribe so we can continue this journey. Because if Germany is gradually losing its industrial breath, then in the south, an even more terrifying specter is present. It is not the collapse of factories, but the chilling silence from the empty cradles. The real nightmare has only just begun in Italy and Greece. There is a crisis that no central bank can print money to solve, and no fiscal policy can salvage. That is when a civilization forgets how to sustain itself. They call it the demographic winter. In Europe, empty cradles are no longer a temporary phenomenon. They have become a hanging sentence. The average birth rate in the EU is now only about 1.5, much lower than the 2.1 needed to maintain the existence of a race. In Italy, this figure has fallen to a record low since 1861. Imagine a not-so-distant future, specifically the year 2050, when nearly 1/3 of the European population will be over the age of 65. Right now, in Germany, for every 5 people you meet on the street, one has already started receiving a pension. The renowned European welfare system is essentially built on a model of borrowing from the future. It needs a large number of healthy young people to support the increasing number of elderly. But when the base of the population pyramid shrinks, the top of the pyramid will crush everything. In Spain, there are vast rural areas with a population density lower than that of the Arctic. In Eastern Europe, countries like Bulgaria and Romania have lost 20% of their population simply because young people choose to leave their homeland in search of the remaining fragments of prosperity in the West. The result? The healthcare system is under double pressure. They lack passionate young doctors, but have an excess of elderly patients needing special care. As a society ages, its aspirations also grow old. The remaining young people in major cities like Paris or Berlin now feel like a rare species being hunted. They have to bear the public debt of their ancestors, while the opportunity to own a home of their own has become more luxurious than ever. A society whose top priority is to protect pensions instead of promoting education and innovation is a society choosing a quiet extinction. The influx of migrants from outside the bloc is introduced as a temporary painkiller for the labor market, but it brings cultural conflicts that policymakers have yet to adequately address. Can you maintain an empire when the next generation no longer has faith in the future to create new life? Or has Europe become so content with the present that they no longer want to see anyone succeed them? If you think these stories need to be spread, please share. Silence can sometimes be scarier than heated debates. Europe is aging, That is a fact. But instead of breaking through with technology to compensate for the labor shortage, they chose a stranger path. They chose to become the sheriffs of the world by imposing countless regulations to manage what remains in a desert of innovation. There is a joke, but it carries a very bitter aftertaste in the financial world. America innovates, China copies, and Europe too regulates. It seems your message is empty. Could you please provide the text you'd like me to translate? It sounds authoritative, but let's look at the harsh reality behind those lines of regulations. Among the 10 largest technology companies in the world, 8 names come from the United States, and the rest are from China. Europe? Absolutely no representatives. In the past 50 years, this continent has not created a new company worth over $100 billion from scratch. We are still living off the legacy of names from our grandparents' time: LVMH, Nestlé, or Volkswagen. Europe is facing a serious mindset issue. They lead the world in privacy laws, GDPR, and AI restriction laws, even though they don't have a competitive AI model. We are trying to become the referee of a match in which we don't even have players on the field. The EU's capital market is fragmented by the legal barriers of each country, making the dream of a unified Silicon Valley remain just on paper. The number of billion-dollar startups per capita in the US is many times higher than in Europe. Why? Because in America, failure is a badge of honor, whereas in Europe, bankruptcy is like a long-lasting punishment, causing the youngest and boldest minds to always carry a mindset of fear. What is the result? A migration of brains. Top STEM students from Oxford or Berlin are quietly relocating to California to access venture capital and creative freedom. We invest heavily in green and clean ESG standards, but we lack core tech companies to implement them. Europe currently has to import most advanced chips and use foundational AI models developed entirely outside its territory. The productivity gap between an American worker and an EU worker has widened by 20% since the beginning of this century. The European financial system still clings to aging banks instead of a dynamic stock market. The real nightmare is not that we become poor immediately, but that we realize we are merely tenants consuming technologies designed by others right in our own homes. Can an entity lead the world with regulations without creating actual products? Or are we just deluding ourselves with numbers about technological ethics while our pockets and status are dwindling? Because technological weakness does not stop at the economy. It leads to another critical gap. When you cannot build your own future, you will also forget how to protect yourself in an increasingly violent world. Since the fall of the Berlin Wall, Europe has carried out one of the largest security scams in human history. They deluded themselves into believing that history had ended, peace was eternal, and guns and ammunition were outdated and immoral. So, they ruthlessly cut the defense budget to pour money into sweet social welfare dreams. To put it bluntly, Europe has outsourced its survival. They entrusted their fate to the US and sheltered under the NATO umbrella to enjoy a lavish life. Look at these telling numbers. The United States alone spends more than $800 billion each year on the military, a figure that far exceeds the total budget of the entire EU combined. In 2023, while the world is shaking, only a few EU countries are fulfilling their commitment to spend 2% of GDP on defense. They have become too accustomed to having American taxpayers pay for their safety, but that umbrella is now torn. The war in Ukraine has exposed a humiliating reality. The ammunition stockpiles of the great powers in Europe are insufficient to sustain a high-intensity conflict for more than a few weeks. Their defense industry is fragmented to the point of absurdity. While the adversary standardizes everything, Europe has too many types of tanks, too many weapon systems that cannot be interchanged or supported by each other. Germany, once a symbol of steel strength, had to establish a special fund of 100 billion euros for rearmament, a correction that came too late and seemed unimaginable before 2022. But money cannot buy the fighting instinct that has been dulled over many generations. The people of Europe now face a painful choice: continue to enjoy welfare or survive. The increase in the military budget is facing fierce opposition because people fear cuts to social welfare. This dependence is not just about guns and ammunition. It is satellite intelligence, nuclear deterrence capability, and even energy. Betting on Russian gas was once hailed as a smart economic choice, but in reality, it was a geopolitical trap that Europe voluntarily walked into. Europe is trying to play the role of the gardener in a forest full of beasts, but they forgot to bring the fence and hired the neighbor to hold the gate key. The present nightmare is not a distant war, but the question: what will happen if one day Washington decides to withdraw this umbrella? When the right to self-determination in foreign affairs is traded for short-term comfort, the price to pay is often complete dependence on the will of others. Is freedom really free? Or is Europe paying for it slowly with its own sovereignty? Don't let yourself be lulled by false announcements of peace. After all the numbers and analyses, we need to face one truth. Europe has not disappeared. This continent is not collapsing in a blaze of smoke and fire. It is quietly transforming into a monument. Look at Venice. In the 15th century, it was the most aggressive and wealthiest naval superpower in the Mediterranean. They controlled all trade routes. They decided the wars. But then, the trade routes changed, and the merchants became rich and lazy. They stopped building ships to start constructing villas. Today, Venice is still there, still magnificent, still wealthy, but it survives by selling tickets to tourists to see what their ancestors once accomplished. Europe is stepping into that very Venetianization scenario. In the coming decades, this will still be the best place in the world to retire. The food will still be delicious, the high-speed trains will still run on time, and healthcare will still be free for wealthy tourists from the US, China, or India who come here to spend their money. European residents, once the architects of humanity, are now gradually becoming polite concierges in their own museum. Even the UK after Brexit cannot escape this curse: low growth and stagnant productivity. Meanwhile, Asian economies and India are accelerating at a pace that Brussels or Berlin can only dream of. A society that is overly sheltered, too stable, seems to have lost its survival instinct and desire for adventure. They have good infrastructure, high education, but they have lost the drive to compete fairly with the outside world. History is inherently fair and ruthless. No superpower lasts forever. Each empire eventually has to accept sitting on the porch, watching the world play the game it once invented. The future of humanity is now being discussed in English, Chinese, or even Hindi. It no longer speaks French or German. Europe is still beautiful, still rich, still luxurious. But history seems to have finished its work with them. If you are a young person full of ambition, will you choose absolute safety within a magnificent museum? Or will you choose to venture into the storms where the future is truly being built? Europe did not vanish in a great explosion. It is quietly transforming into a magnificent monument under the twilight. Like a cruel law of time, every empire will eventually have to step back to make way for new blood that is more eager. The true nightmare of the old continent is not its rapid collapse or the wars of smoke and fire, but rather its gradual fading into a peaceful slumber where all comforts are available but the aspirations have run dry. History seems to have finished its work with them, and now, that pen is in the hands of nations that dare to dream, dare to act, and are ready to embrace the storms on new horizons. If you feel that these analyses have provided you with a fresh and profound perspective on the world order, please support us by hitting the like button so that the algorithm can spread this message to more people. Don't forget to share the video with friends who are interested in geopolitics and subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next investigations into the rise and fall of nations. Your companionship is the greatest motivation for us to continue uncovering the truths hidden behind the dry numbers. The content in this video is for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes based on research at the time of production. The opinions expressed are of a personal, analytical nature and should not be considered as investment, financial, or business strategy advice for any individual or organization. We are not responsible for any losses arising from the use of information in this video. Viewers should conduct their own independent research and consult experts before making important decisions.